When injustice strides so easily, when evil reigns and you feel there is little you can do, remember we are all one. You are part of the great oneness, and what you do affects the whole. You can choose goodness. When you change your life, you change the world. An immense grace hums beneath the noise of this world. When you live in harmony with it, you intensify the great music of life that renews the earth. You are a voice in the chorus, a string on the beloved's guitar. When you change your note, you change the whole chord. Amen. So thank you for being here with us. I am so tickled to announce our program tonight. It's about a carbon dioxide emission inventory for your faith institution. And Chuck is going to talk about how to do that and how Central Baptist did that. Chuck Marshall was an environmental scientist for many years and worked for an environmental consulting firm doing projects for the EPA and OSHA. He was the person who was responsible for the solar panels that are on the church, his church, Central Baptist in Wayne. He also managed the church's program for getting to zero emissions by reducing and offsetting emissions. He was an original board member for PA IPL. And he has a master's degree from Drexel University's environmental management program, where he was a part of a team of graduate students who developed, wait for it, an emissions inventory at the Philadelphia airport. So he's well familiar with this. And I have to say, beyond his academic and work accolades, he is just the greatest, most faithful steward of our environment. So I welcome tonight Chuck Marshall.
Oh, thank you, Courtney. I wasn't expecting that. So any questions on my presentation? I think I can end it there now. Let me do see if I can bring this up to a full, yeah, there we go. Can everybody see that? How's it look? Good. Okay, great.
Looks good.
So this is going to be a combination of what I hope will be some practical things that we did at our church that you might find also fit into your place of worship. Plus, it gets a little nerdy at times when we go into some of the calculations that were necessary to develop carbon dioxide footprint. This is just to get you familiar with the building and the grounds and so forth. That's a picture of the front of the church. We have a main building, and we also have a what we call the Mission House, and which is rented out to a women's resource center. And then there's a living space on the third floor. We have about 200 members, and I would say we're not considered a neighborhood church. This becomes important later on when we talk about travel emissions to and from church. I think we're more of a regional church, so our members just don't hop on the bus line going up and down Lancaster Avenue or SEPTA. People do a lot of driving, and so vehicles are the main way to get to and from church. We have a nursery school that operates 5 days a week. And as it turns out, they don't have a separate meter. So all of their electricity and other heating, ventilating, air conditioning, well, I should say heating, ventilating, comes through our main system. We do have a little bit of air conditioning. When our main hall in the bottom of the building was renovated, air conditioning was put in there, and that's where we have summer worship. We abandon the sanctuary that's up on the second floor and go down into that that hall. And there's also air conditioning supplied to the kitchen and offices. And we do not have any vehicles in our church. So when we set out on this to prepare an emission inventory, we had to first decide whether to do it on all greenhouse gases or just carbon dioxide. And we decided on carbon dioxide because if you look at some of the other greenhouse gases like nitrous oxides, perfluorocarbons, methane, sulfur hexafluoride, they're not related to mostly the fossil fuel sources that drive our consumption of electricity and gas for heating purposes. And so we decided to just focus on carbon dioxide. And the reason we did it is because we wanted to establish what our footprint is. How big of an impact do we have as measured by carbon dioxide emissions? And this became then a baseline tool so that when we went to put in reduction programs, we could use similar technology or calculations to calculate how effective those CO2 reduction programs were going to be. And this helped us establish a target for getting to zero emissions. When we first started out on our program, we didn't talk about getting to zero. I think it was only after we saw that it could be attained. So the first thing we needed to do was to identify the sources of CO2 in the building. And as I mentioned before, we have heating, ventilating, air conditioning in the buildings. Then we have travel to and from the place of worship. This is often not considered when places of worship are doing carbon dioxide emission inventories. We also have a nursery or other school operations, but as I said before, they're not, they don't have their own separate meters. They come through our meters. You would need to look at a fleet of vehicles if you had buses that take people to and from different places. There's also some maintenance and cleaning for solvents that are bought. And then also office practices. We need to take that into consideration. There are things like the paper that a place of worship buys, and also products like toner for copying machines that are, highly carbon based. So those are some of, in our case, the sources of CO2. And by the way, feel free to ask questions at any time. I only see 3 people right now. So maybe Courtney, if you could be on the lookout for anybody who raises their hand.
Sure, thanks.
Okay. One of the things we did about 15 years ago, not only related to climate change, but also our whole waste situation at the church, was our office administrator and building custodian manager made a list of 22 items that CBC buys most frequently. So if you took everything that we purchased and what would be what turned out to be 22 most common items. So there are, many paper products, many cleaning supplies, worship supplies, office administration products. And that gave us a little bit of insight, particularly into things like solvents. And we we eventually went with green seal products on solvents. But it helped us also cut down on the number of different colors that we bought for paper. I don't know about your place of worship, but in ours, there's different color papers meant different things. So, but sometimes buying all those different colors has more of an environmental impact than just buying as many non-colors as you can. When we did this, it doesn't require more than a spreadsheet type of software to record all the data and do the calculations. For heating, ventilating, and air conditioning, we just got our utility bills that reflect what was then an equilibrium time of consumption. So we could calculate the number of kilowatt hours per year or the number of cubic feet of gasoline that of gas, not gasoline, I'm sorry, of gas, natural gas that's consumed. We used to have a boiler that was a combination boiler. It could burn either oil or gas, and we got rid of that in favor of a 93% efficient boiler. And then travel, some of the data that's pretty easy to put together is the vehicle miles traveled, the average miles per gallon that various families get with their vehicle, and then using a readily available EPA emission factor related to carbon dioxide per gallon of gasoline.
Hey, Chuck.
Yeah.
Can you go back to the boiler? You said you changed out the dual fuel boiler to a 93% emissions boiler. What does it 90?
Efficient. Efficient.
What's that burning?
Natural gas.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So you can see here that there's the data that's needed to make the calculations of emission inventory is fairly readily obtainable from invoices and from EPA references that are readily available online, or from your own individual congregants, such as vehicle miles traveled. We did not calculate for maintenance in terms of the solvent emissions, and we decided we could add a factor just to account for those. When in doubt, you can also always add a factor to bump up the emissions for something you think you didn't account for or think you couldn't account for with some degree of accuracy. For operations, we used reams of paper as a proxy. I mean, when you, this may not sound too good to a person who gives sermons, but one way of looking at the production of a place of worship is that it produces a lot of paper. So, but on that paper are written very good things. So I'll show you this in a couple of minutes. We used reams of paper that we bought as a proxy for the operations of the office. So for HVAC, we got our bills together. We use about 36,000 kilowatt hours. That should be a small K, kilowatt hours per year on average. And this was after the solar panels were installed in 2008. And that covers both buildings on the property. And even though we have solar panels, we decided to not use this capacity to offset or lower our emissions, carbon dioxide emissions. And that we felt we needed to do that because we do sell the SRECs that we get in a market. And so that allows someone else to emit carbon dioxide. And so we didn't feel that we could use that reduction from, we generate about 12,000 kilowatt hours a year with the 48 solar panels that we have on the roof. Our natural gas consumption is about 7,014 CCF, that's 100 cubic feet units. And that's for both buildings. And as I said, we do have air conditioning, but that doesn't get involved in the calculations because the calculations are with the air conditioning in place. Since the boiler went into, I realized when putting this presentation together that I haven't gone back and looked at our gas consumption before and after the boiler to see how much that has reduced. We chose to calculate our CO2 emissions by looking at weight, at pounds. We decided to put them in a category of pounds emitted. And that's because one of the electricity generation emission factors that we could get online was expressed as pounds per kilowatt hour. And sometimes when you look up factors of emissions for carbon dioxide, they're expressed as per million BTUs of fuel input in a utility, or sometimes as in terms of the output, either in kilowatt hours or kilowatt K with meaning 1,000 kilowatts produced. And sometimes the factors are expressed as kilograms instead of pounds of CO2. So if you have to use one that's expressed in kilograms, then you can multiply the kilograms by 2.214 to get pounds. So because we get our electricity from PICO, we couldn't readily find a PICO carbon dioxide emission factor for their mix of fuels. So that's what we could find, an emission factor for the PMJ system, Pennsylvania, Maryland, Jersey, area-wide system of electricity of the grid, so to speak. And that factor was 1,001.72 pounds of CO2 per 1,000 watt hours used, or per kilowatt hours used. And so we use this in the first line of the calculation to multiply against the 36,000 kilowatt hours that we use to get a carbon dioxide emission of 36,062 pounds from our electricity consumption. Our gas consumption, our natural gas consumption, actually, we've found an emission factor of 0.122 pounds of CO2 per cubic foot of natural gas. So we actually generate, or or emit 86,663 pounds of CO2 for our natural gas. And so it shows you that heating our buildings requires more energy than lighting them or using air conditioning or the operations. And then this is where the using reams of paper comes in. We found an emission factor for under manufacturing in the paper sector that had an emission rate of 2.2 pounds per ream of, I'm sorry, 12.5 kilograms per ream of paper. So from our purchasing records, we rounded up to about 200 reams of paper consumed, and that equals 5,535 pounds of CO2 per year. And then we threw in the factor for the unknown emissions from solvents and toner at 2.5% of what all the other emissions are. So that gave an extra 3,207 pounds. So those totals equal 131,467 pounds per year. So that's a fairly large amount. That's just for the building. So when you take travel emissions into consideration, quite a few years ago now, we did a back of the envelope calculation of travel, and we had 7 staff at the time, and we used vehicle miles traveled times the average miles per gallon that the vehicle gets times an emission factor, which we got off a website, and we came up with 4,154 pounds of CO2 for staff traveling back and forth. Then for Sunday travel, which is of course the biggest, was 40,598 pounds. But there's also a lot of meetings that occurred during the week, and this is one of the benefits of doing virtual meetings. We've had very few meetings at the church over the last couple of years. So pre-COVID, those emissions were 20,299 pounds of CO2, giving a total of 65,000 pounds for travel. And that equals about 49% of what the building emissions are. So it's a big enough factor to not be ignored when calculating the total carbon footprint for our place of worship. We did a check on the travel emissions calculations. We gave each family unit a form to fill out so we could help estimate the CO2 emissions from their vehicle. And we used the Cool Congregations calculator, which Bill Cousins referred to earlier. We asked each person to fill out the form with their round trip distance to and from church, and asked them to, most people have a pretty good feel for what kind of mileage they get for their vehicle. Even with making the form what we thought was simple, we had to do a lot of follow-up and ask people if they wanted us to fill out the form for them. So we ended up doing that, but our actual our estimates that we did on the back of an envelope turned out to be very comparable to what the forms showed us is the level of emissions. And so after that, in order to offset travel emissions, we set a goal of 25 tons per year of CO2 to to reduce or offset. So this is the total when you add the building and operations and the travel together, 196,518 pounds of CO2 per year. And we learned that it's probably, not probably, we learned that it's a good idea to have either two people do the calculations as you're going along and as you're looking up different references. But it's, you have to know what all the mathematical symbols mean to when you need to know whether you're using a capital C meaning 100, or whether it's a small c just meaning 1 cubic foot of something. Kilograms versus kilograms, 1,000 kilograms versus just a single kilogram, and whether you're using m's such as 1,000 or 1 million. So it's not difficult, or it's easy to make a mistake doing that. Or the other thing would be to have someone else check all your calculations and sources after you do the emission inventory. And then the various, this is a list of the various things we've done at Central Baptist to reduce emissions and have also other environmental impacts. We have 7 heating zones. We've been, long ago we installed, we got down to T8 ballast on the fluorescent lights. We have the solar panels. We published a waste management guide using those 22 things that we buy frequently. We have bought green seal solvents and cleaners. This doesn't eliminate CO2 emissions entirely, but the solvents are easier to deal with.
Chuck, yeah. Arthur has a question.
Yeah.
Arthur, can you unmute and ask? There you go.
Yes. I'm going to have to go soon, but I thank you for your presentation. I'm thinking of trying to do some sort of a energy and CO2 evaluation of what we generate in our house. One question is, what was the efficiency of the boiler, the old boiler? Do you know what it was rated
as?
It
was about 65% efficient.
Yeah. So that was a big, marked reduction in the amount of energy needed to heat.
Yeah, it was a 35-year-old boiler, and yeah, that was a big change. We could have even gotten higher. There are boilers, and I don't know whether Bill's boiler does this, but there's some that program in the outside temperatures. It does real-time temperature measurements in order to really fine-tune the adjustments in the boiler.
Yeah.
One thing, if you're doing a family calculation of your footprint, is to go to the national IPL site and look at the calculators that they have. It's you can do it online in a matter of 5 to 10 minutes to get a family footprint calculation.
Yeah. So the other comment I wanted to make was, do you have desktop computers in your church?
We do. Well, I'm sorry now. There was
laptops.
Yeah, they've converted to laptops.
So my wife was my wife was the executive director of Beth Am, our synagogue, and when she came there, everybody kept the the probably 4 or 5 desktop computers then on all night, and so she asked people to turn them off because unless they're monitoring something all night, there's no need for them to be on. And that can save essentially the equivalent of probably about a 150 or 200 watt light bulb, maybe more.
Yeah, that's a very prudent and sound idea.
Okay, but anyway, thank you for your presentation.
You're welcome.
Thanks,
We have
Arthur.
to go. We do purchase wind energy for our main building and for our mission house. And we also held an energy party, and I think I have a separate slide on that. And we have a Bright Idea program and tree plantings. So the last three I'm going to explain in just a little more detail. Well, here's a picture of our panels up on the roof. They're supported by ballast at the bottom. You can see those bricks, sort of that are holding them down, and then the pipe at the back going diagonally goes. Those are the wires, and they go down to our basement where they go through inverters to have the DC current converted to alternating current. The Bright Idea program that we had was introduced to us by Don Kane and Mary Kane from Mainline Unitarian Church back in 2007 or 8. And we met with the Bernardine Center down in Chester to discuss giving them, at the time, compact fluorescent lights. And their executive director said that she'd be up for that, and we started a program. Mainline Unitarian had to back out of the program after a year or so, and then so Central Baptist Church and sort of inherited the program, and we expanded it in 2014 to include the Phoenixville area community center, community services. That's the PACS. And we've also since been able to, because the price of LED lights have come down, we don't deal with compact fluorescent lights anymore. It's all LED lights. And we've gotten some support in the past from Mainline Unitarian Church and from the Baptist Church of the Great Valley. And Pam, if your church wants to donate any more to help us with this program, that would be glad to accept that.
Okay.
We did an early survey with the Bernardine Center, and it showed that their clientele who get the lights were replacing incandescent bulbs that were generally on about 6 hours per day. They often did this with outside lights where security was a concern in their neighborhood and they needed to have lights, and also inside lights. So we still do this, we give away about 700 LED lights per year, and we buy them on sale at either Home Depot or Pico. Also, for a while there, pre-pandemic, had with sales at, I live in Paoli, so we got them from the Paoli hardware store. We generally paid, now we're paying about $1.75 per bulb. And we use our church's sales tax exemption so we don't have to pay the sales tax on them. And Cricket Hunter, who was on staff for a while at PA IPL, developed this calculator, the Bright Idea calculator. And I don't have time to really go into all the details of this, but it's easy to use, and it showed that we would get credit for about 74,565 pounds of carbon dioxide per year with this Bright Idea program. But at the church, we also encourage people to, if they wanted to reduce their CO2 emissions going back and forth from church, they could either buy a bulb, LED bulb replacements, or buy wind energy for their own home, or plant trees somewhere. And we gave each person this handout. So if you look down on the left-hand column, if your baseline emissions were at this level of pounds per year, then you've had three options. The next three are the three options you have. You could buy, if your emissions were 600 pounds per year, let's say, you could buy 429 kilowatt hours of wind energy, and you'd offset those emissions. Or you could install 4 60-watt bulbs in your home to offset your emissions, or plant 3 trees. And we send a check to a group called Trees, Water, People out of Fort Collins, Colorado. We send it every year. They operate several nurseries around the world, and one of them is from near where a sister church of ours is in El Salvador. And they've gotten certified. Well, no, they haven't gotten certified, but they run their nursery, their forest nursery, just like a certified nursery would. They have protection. They have to, they undertake the practice that if they plant trees, the trees have to have an expected life of at least 40 years. So that often means that they sometimes have to be fenced in or protected in some way, depending on the area they live in. So our costs for the program run about $1,800 a year. So it's about 1.4 cents per pound of CO2 that we offset. And we did one other thing. We had a home energy party, an audit party. One of our families volunteered their house, an old house in Wayne, and a company called Orange Solution became our partner. And they went there on a Thursday, did the audit, and then we had about 15 people go to the house on Sunday after worship, and the audit results were presented by Orange Solution, and we broke up into 3 groups and went around the house and learned about how they did the audit and what the results were. And then there was a free audit given by the company, so people, somebody pulled a name out of a hat, and then others like my wife and I signed up to have an audit done at our house. And at the time, the audits were inexpensive because they were being subsidized through federal legislation. And I don't know now whether that, but you can get an audit from PICO. So, and I've heard those audits are very good. Maybe people on this call who have gotten those audits. So that's the story of Central Baptist Church. Our kids, with the help of some parents, celebrated. They made a little sign and carried it around the church, and we all clapped. And so I know, Courtney, it's cheerful, isn't it?
So Chuck, okay. Is that it?
Yeah.
A couple of things. Do you think that we can, wait, I'm trying to unspotlight you. Why can't I unspotlight you? Do you think we can get a copy of your PowerPoint?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
That would be great.
Chuck might have to stop sharing in order for us to
thank
all
you.
see each other.
Bill or Chuck, can you stop sharing your screen?
Yep.
There you go.
Thanks, Bill.
Does anybody have any questions for, yes, Drew?
Yeah, I have one. Chuck, do you have any way, when you buy wind energy, do you have any way of calculating the CO2 emissions for Pico delivering the wind energy?
I know we don't. So you're pointing out that,
Well, we pay an extra, like you said, an extra penny a kilowatt hour or more even now, probably for wind energy or renewable energy, but it's still being delivered, I assume, by the cheapest energy Pico can buy. They're probably required to deliver it with the cheapest, dirtiest energy they can. So,
yeah.
I wonder about that. And I guess the other question is, with your solar, are there times where you're generating more? Do you have net metering or any way of storing energy?
Yeah, particularly on a day like a Saturday where there's nobody at the church, and particularly during the pandemic. Yeah, we're putting electricity back into the system. We have a double meter situation. I think I'm trying to think further about your point. So you're saying that the electricity delivered from wind is at a cost that's greater than what Pico would normally deliver.
Well, no, I don't know that it's
Which sounds right.
But if you think about it, more than half of our utility bill, even if we're paying at the price to compare, is for the distribution and the delivery, and that uses electricity. It's not a very efficient process, delivering that energy to us. So
Yeah.
that's one of the things I think, as we look at on-site storage, getting into microgrids and things in the future where we'll actually be able to use community energy and avoid some of that wasteful distribution. I think we're never going to get to net zero if we pay the utility to deliver the electricity at the cheapest possible, way. So
yeah,
I just think it's something that's often overlooked.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, thank you. Anita.
Oh, Anita. Thanks, Drew.
Okay. So I'm of course wondering about the heating and cooling stuff. I'm just wondering how you decided that the boiler was the highest priority thing to do, and were there other measures you considered for reducing the energy consumption of the building, and how did you figure out to stick with a boiler versus going with like a different kind of system?
I think we did not have, I think I was not on the committee the properties committee that did this investigation, but we don't have much land. And so I don't think they really looked into a ground thermal, underground thermal systems. And other than that, I think that was all that was looked at. Remind me of your other questions.
So were there any other measures you guys considered? Like, how did you figure out what was your biggest contribution, of energy, to your energy bill, basically? How did you decide that the boiler was the thing to replace?
We couldn't parse the bill down into what amount of energy came from what particular uses. So it was more or less, people trying to figure out what other people were doing. So replacing the ballast on the fluorescent lights was something, and then we also, anywhere in the building, we replaced incandescent bulbs with with LEDs. For the big outside lights, we used, I even forget what we used on that, but we did replace some of those big outside lights that, you know, shine all night, that light up the parking lot. And it wasn't I would call a systematic kind of usage. It was more of a, you know, the people who were involved in it deciding what they knew about ways in which to reduce energy. We wrapped some pipes that were delivered from the basement to the heat exchangers up in the sanctuary, so that they wouldn't lose heat on the way up to delivering the water. So things like that, yeah. And I guess, you know, ours is more of an offset. When our zero emissions program is based more on offsets. So it's not based on reducing the energy consumption down as low as it could. But there are things like the 7 thermostats for the different heat zones, which will do some of that. And we had to watch, for the organ, sometimes the organ would have to be, that somebody would go in Saturday night in order to heat up the organ to make it capable of being played on Sunday morning.
Thanks, Anita. Bill had a question.
Well, it was also a comment in response to Anita to just supplement some of what Chuck said. One of the old saws in this business is the cheapest energy is the energy you don't have to use. So if in looking at your building, you have like a lot of air leaks or really inefficient windows, often, or little or no insulation in the ceilings, that if you can upgrade those things, that's often cheaper than doing a major heating system replacement. Or you can do those things in conjunction with upgrading or replacing the heating system. And often that results in you can get a much smaller heating system. Like in our private home, when we replaced an old gas-fired boiler, the old one was something like 300,000 BTUs, and we had done some insulation and we'd put on some storm windows and things like that. And when they came in to size the replacement boiler, it only needed to be like 150,000 BTUs. So it was like half the size of the boiler that was being replaced. And I think that's probably true for a lot of churches. When fuel was really cheap and buildings were really leaky, they would oversize these units, and they often, if they're too big, they run inefficiently. So if you can seal up the leaks and stuff, then you may not need as big a replacement system as what you have in there now.
Yeah, we're working on sealing up all the leaks right away. But then down the road, as things break, we kind of want to know what to recommend the property committee, in terms of replacement. And we definitely have the situation of having a gigantic boiler, which is way bigger than we need. And if we could seal up the leaks, I don't even know what fraction of the size we would need,
Yeah.
Well, and so this is about homes. One of the interesting things that I've learned is that this is not a static situation, that this changes. So 10 years ago, maybe we got a dual fuel heating system for our home. So the furnace kicks on when the temperature goes below a certain degree, but we have a heat pump. But now I think the heat pumps have gotten so advanced that they're recommending just heat pumps for homes, which I think it's exciting, but who knows these things? Like, if you don't think about it, if you don't ask these questions, you don't know.
Yeah, people are installing those super efficient heat pumps in Maine. I was on a webinar and so those things are rated now to like 20 below zero.
That is, so I have chills just thinking about that, because then if you're using a renewable energy electricity supplier, you're getting, because, and so the other thing that I think is so interesting, oh, thanks, Phyllis, is that, so natural gas is going up. Energy is going up. Fossil fuels are not the way to go. And people are so beside themselves that they're paying so much for energy, when instead of thinking about we're paying so much for this natural gas, we've got to think of other natural renewable sources, right? And that's not what they're thinking. They're just mad at the gas company. Well, you know what? I think you have to think differently. So we have time. Well, I'll give us time for one more question if anybody has anything to ask Chuck. Chuck, you are wonderful. Thank you for that really brilliant report. And Chuck will send that to me. I'm going to send out some other information of things that we talked about in our 7 o'clock group. Is there anything for the good of the mainline Pennsylvania Interfaith Power and Light? Thank you for all showing up. Blessings on the rest of your week.
Courtney,
Thank you. Great presentation.
I put in a plug for our Philadelphia chapter meeting, which is next Tuesday evening. We have a presentation from a staff person at Helen Gim's office. Helen is one of the citywide city council people for Philadelphia. And she and another council person have proposed an act they're calling the Community Health Act, which, if it were adopted by City Council in Philadelphia, would require, among other things, that any new facility going into Philadelphia, new industrial or energy consuming facility, they have to do a cumulative impact analysis, which means they have to look at not only the incremental little bit of additional pollution that facility might generate, but look at it in combination with the other already in place sources of pollution in that area to see if the new facility would have an adverse impact on the health in that neighborhood. So our talk, we're going to be hearing about this Community Health Act, and it sounds like it's a little bit distant from climate change, but it really has a big impact in these so-called environmental justice or environmental injustice neighborhoods in our metropolitan area. You're mute, Courtney.
Can you send me information on that? And I will include that in what I send out, just to remind people that this is something that's available.
Perfect. Yeah, I'll
Thank you.
either tonight or first thing in the morning.
Perfect. Thank you. All right. All right, team. Have a good night.